Are you looking for a nice pattern to make a christening dress but can't find what you like? Then come along with me and I'll show you how to pattern make your own quick and easy, which can be very satisfying. Let's go. Hey guys, Musa here from Quantum Home Improvements and Solutions. Welcome back to the channel. Our son's wife gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and they asked me if I could make the baptismal dress, the christening dress. And for me, that was a total honor. So my background originally is dressmaking, and I generally don't buy patterns, but in fact I make my own. And so all you need is a picture to work off, something that you like, and you need basic blocks or a garment that fits. So in this case here, I'm using the garment that fits the baby and use basic principles and make the patterns. So now I'll get into it and I'll show you how I'm going to do it. The first thing you need to do when you're pattern making is have a really good look at the design of the garment, and you got to look at the proportions of everything. So you look at the bodice, the skirt length, the way it flares out, the arm length, whether it's puffy or not puffy, and all these need to be designed into the pattern. So going from the basic pattern that we're looking at, which is this garment here, you then take measurements off this and then you incorporate it in the design. So for example, I'm going to make the height of the bodice from my thumb up to the neckline. Now that works out to be at the base of the neck, on the back 15 centimeters, and on the front there's a bit of a drop in the neckline, so it'll be 12 centimeters. So I've already measured that out. In actual fact, I've taken all the measurements of the garment. I've taken the chest measurement, the waist measurement, the arm length, the armhole, the neckline. Now I'll incorporate it all into the design. So I'll just turn this pattern making paper around. First I'll start with the bodice, both the back and the front. So looking at this, you can see that it's got the press studs in the front. Now I'm going to make this as one piece and the back will have the buttons. Okay, so I'll incorporate that in the pattern making as well. So I know that the height from the waist to the back of the neck is 15 centimeters, and then I'm going to add 1.5 centimeters to reach the top of the shoulders. So that's 16.5 centimeters. So I'll just grab my dressmaking ruler and pencil. I'll grab the rubber as well. Always need a rubber. Okay, so first I'll measure down from any point. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to start and measure down 16.5, and I'm going to transfer that measurement across. Just here and here. So I know that the waist is 23 centimeters, and I'm going to halve that measurement to 11.5 because I'm making it in two pieces. And also I've got to add seam allowance and a 1.5 overlap. So in total, both sides will have a 1.5 centimeter overlap, which gives a total of 3 centimeters. So I'm going to go 11.5, and then it makes it 14.5. Now that's on the base. Now again, I'm going to go up 15 centimeters to the bottom of the neck, and I'll transfer that measurement. Okay, so the chest size, I know that's roughly starts at 5.5 centimeters from the waistline. And these are all estimates that I've made from the drawing. So you can see in the drawing here, from the waist to the bottom of the armhole, I've estimated it's roughly about 5.5 centimeters. It could have been 5, it could have been 6. As you're pattern making over the years, you'll get better and better at this, as I have. And so I've been pattern making now for well over 35 years, on and off. So then I'm going to transfer this measurement. All right, so I know the chest width is 24. I'm going to halve that, and I'm going to add that 3 centimeter to the end like I did for the waist. So that's 15. And remember, this has no seam allowance at this point, so I need to add the seam allowance in a moment. All right, so now I'm going to mark out the neckline. Now to find the neckline, again, I'm going to come out 1.5 centimeters for the seam allowance, and then another 1.5 for the overlap. So now I know that the neck width is 11 centimeters, and I'm going to divide that by 2, so it's 5.5. So 5.5 comes off this point here, All right, now from that measurement, I'm just going to do a nice little curve, and that becomes the neckline. I'm going to run that up as well because we've got seam allowance to put to this. Now, so we're going to create the seam allowance here, and I'll just go around at 90° to the base of the curve and put in the seam allowance. So again, off the garment, I've measured 10 centimeters up for the height of the shoulder, and I'll just draw a line there. Okay, so the shoulder works out 5 centimeters according to the garment. So I'll just measure that off, and that's it there. Rule that in. Okay, so the width difference, that's 13, that's 15. Okay, so according to the garment, that's also comes in 2 centimeters. So that is working out really well. I'm very happy with that. So with the armhole, again, we're going to just draw that in. Okay, so there's a slight angle coming out this way, so almost 90° to the shoulder, just for a little bit. So that's the 90° just there, and then nice little curve around. Now this curve here is not a big curve, it's just a shallow curve. Okay, so the front always has a shallow curve. Now being a baby, I'm going to make both front and back almost the same in the curve, almost. And so I'm just going to come up here 3 centimeter and put a notch mark just there. So that's going to help me later when I'm sewing the sleeve on. So now I'm just going to put the seam allowance and run that all the way around. I'll put it on the side as well. Marry that up. And I'll just add seam allowance to the bottom as well. All right, so that is the back bodice done. So remember, this mark here is where the buttons are going to be put on, just there. So the actual bodice size is just between there and there. So I'll just put here, Christening dress, back, cut, 2 pieces. Now, this needs a grain line as well. So you've got to draw in the grain line, and generally when you're doing a bodice, the grain line is to the parallel with the back. So I'm going to run a line just here, put an arrow, and that becomes my grain line. So with this here, I'm going to make this bodice have a lining. It's going to be a lot easier to sew, then I don't have to put facings everywhere. So I'll cut this one out. Now remember, I only use paper scissors. All right, so that's the rear bodice done. So now I'm going to make the front bodice. Now the front bodice is the same measurements as the rear. The only difference, it's going to have a lower neckline, slightly different armhole, and also it's on fold. So there is no overlap of fabric. It will have just one straight piece going across. Usually I'll pattern make the 2 pieces on the one go, but here I'm not, just to show individually each piece. So I could have made 2 of them just here and superimposed all the measurements. Okay, so now I'll just do the front. Add in seam allowance. The height is 12 centimeters instead of 15 like the back. Okay, so the chest height is 5.5 centimeters from the waistline. Okay, and the width is 24 divided by 2, so it's 12 plus seam allowance. And so the waist is 23 divided by 2, 11.5 plus seam allowance. Okay, so I can just now draw in the seam allowance. So again, the shoulder is 5 centimeters, so I'll mark that in, rule that. All right, add seam allowance. So the armhole will be very similar to the rear, so just a bit more shallow. And again, I'll put a marker in. So I made a mistake earlier. The front actually has a 1 mark and the rear actually has 2 marks. That identifies the rear. So when you're sewing, you know that the two notches is for the rear on the sleeve. So you know which side to sew the sleeve on. All right, so now I'll just put the seam allowance. So it's almost done. So the height of the neckline is just here, a nice curve. Now I generally do it by hand because I'm used to it. So you do a 90 degree just off this section here and then just start to turn. All right, so that looks pretty good. And then you add 1.5 centimeters to the neckline as well. And that's it. Now this is a center front. So when you have a mark, an arrow running to an edge, it means it's on fold. So that is the grain line right there on fold. So we just put center front fold. Okay, and so again, christening dress and front cut 1. So again, I'm going to cut 1 for the satin fabric, and then I'm going to cut another for the lining. So if I put the 2 pieces together, you'll find that they fit pretty much exact. Everything's landed perfectly. And so the center front lines up with the center back line where the fold line is perfectly. So going by the picture, the skirt length I've estimated 35 centimeters, not including seam allowance top or bottom, so that'll be 38 centimeters. And also the gathering I'm allowing here, so the actual total width on this garment is 46 centimeters. I'm gonna make it, in actual fact, 90 centimeters. So I'm gonna double it to make it that gathered look. And the base, I'm gonna make it 100 centimeters in total. So an extra 10 centimeters. Okay, so I'll start with the center front, and I'll come across 90 divided by 2, which is 45. And then I add the seam allowance. Now I know it's 38 centimeters down. Just mark that in. Now that includes seam allowance as well. Okay, so the base I'm gonna make it 50 centimeters plus seam allowance. And then I'll marry up the outer edge and seam allowance. Now one thing I haven't done is allowed for the curve of the skirt, so I actually might allow that in. Just about there somewhere. And from that point, just curve a line. Okay. Run the seam allowance through. Okay, so I'll do the same on this one. And then just run that through as well. Okay. All right, so now this will be on fold just here, and this will be both front and back piece. It's very simple. I'm not making this complicated in any way. So center front and center back fold. Cut 1 front, cut 1 back. Okay, so it's done. I'll just cut that out. So that's a skirt and the bodice. The next thing is the sleeve. Okay, so measuring off this, the sleeve length is 18 centimeters. I'm not going to change that because I really don't want the sleeves to come past her arm. If it comes up a little bit on a baby, it's not too bad. Okay, so I'm going to put in 1.5. I'm going to start from the base here. Put in 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, before I start. I'm just going to do a 90-degree off the base of the center mark. So I've just marked the center. This can be our grain line as well, because it's 90-degree off the base. Okay, so the sleeve length, I'm going to make 18. Now the cuff width at the moment is 13. I will increase that because according to this pattern, they've got the arms gathered together. So I'll do the same. So I'm just going to make that a straight run sleeve. Sleeves usually run in on a taper to the cuff. Okay, so I'm not going to make a big sleeve. I'm just going to make it very shallow. According to the picture, it hasn't got a big high sleeve with gathering. It's got a little bit of gathering, but not much. So going by this garment, the distance between the height of the sleeve from this point to this point is 10 centimeters. So I'm just going to make that 20 centimeters. All right, and I'm just going to go straight down with seam allowance. Okay, so I'm just going to make the lower end of the sleeve 12 centimeters. And that's without seam allowance. Okay, so now the curve of the sleeve I'm sort of mucking around with this a little bit. All right. Again, you need a rubber all the time when you're pattern making because you've got to play around with the sizes a little bit. Now, going by this, I think it's a little bit too high, this sleeve. I think I'm going to have to knock it down a little bit, and I will. All right, see how that looks like, and I'll calculate that up. Going by this armhole, which I measured earlier, it's at 22 centimeters all the way around. Now this one, because I've gone a little bit higher, has increased that to 23. So the total distance around is 23, and I'm fairly happy with that. I'll just fix up the curve a little bit. Now, you notice it's a bit more straighter this side than this side, and that's done on purpose. The rear section of the sleeve, the back section, which is this, has a more of a dip. The front is more straighter. So now we just transfer those measurements across. We came across 3 centimeters for our notching. So that's there, and the back sleeve has 2 notches, and the front has 1 notch. So we're going to put the notch in there, and then that'll marry up with our bodice. Now we have to add seam allowance to this, so I'll just put that in now. Okay, so the sleeve's now complete, and as I said earlier, this becomes our grain line just here, and we just write the name of the piece. So again, Christening sleeve, cut 2. So I'm happy with that, and I'll cut that out now. Okay, so now I've got to make the straps, and the straps I've measured roughly, I think they're going to be around about 80 centimeters long and around 4.5 centimeters in thickness, not including seam allowance. Okay, so that's 4.5 centimeters in the width, times 2, because we're going to put on a fold, that's 9 centimeters, and then seam allowance either side, so that's 3 centimeters, so we make it 12 centimeters wide. So broken lines indicate the stitch line. Now this is the fold line, just here. And then again the stitch line. So on this side here, I'll put 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Now on the other side, it has a taper according to the design. So I'm going to taper that down and basically going to taper it about 3 centimeters. So I'm going to measure from the seam allowance out 80 centimeters, which is right there. So that's to the base. Then I'm going to add 3 centimetres. I'll add 3.5 actually. I'll add my seam allowance while I'm there. All right, so the strap's now complete and I'll cut that out. Okay, I'll put a grain line here using the fold line as the grain line. Again, I'm just going to write on here fold line and arrow. So this is the grain as well. So that's grain line, fold line, strap, yep. And cut 2. One for the left, one for the right. So the bottom lace doesn't need a pattern. You just basically apply it as you need it. There also is a lace on the bodice. Now, I don't need to make a pattern for that. Later when I cut the lace out, I'll use the bodice as my marker. The only other pattern I've got to make now, the last pattern, is on the shoulder line. So there is lace just above the sleeve. So I'm going to use the exact sleeve that we've made and add to it. So I'll use the sleeve, draw it again as an outline only. Now what I'm going to do for the lace actually does stick up in the air more. So for the lace, and it lands not all the way up the armhole, so it's only just a little piece, and I'm estimating that's going to be 10 centimetres each side. So I'm going to find the centre again. There's the centre. Okay, definitely too long. I'm going to make it 8 centimetres. There and there. So basically this lace section will come out of here, and I'm going to make it where it will be a little bit higher. It's got more of a roll to the sleeve. So I'm going to make it like that. Then also I'm going to make it wider. Remember, this is only an outline. Let's find the fold line. I'm going to cut it. All right, so sometimes you do need to do this to your pattern. Now I'm going to make the exact same. I'm going to increase the width. So I'm going to make the width about 4 centimetres wider. So what I'm going to do basically, I'll use the ruler as my point of measure. I might cut that out actually, it's going to be a lot easier to work with. Now this already has seam allowance, I don't need to add any. All right, so basically I'm just going to run that pattern, superimpose it again to there. That's my marker. So that's the left side. This is the right side. Put a marker. I'm going to increase the height just marginally because we've gone a little bit small there. And then this is going to be gathered in to the sleeve. And so we've got 2 points there, and this will be the base of the lace, just there. So basically that's a pattern. Seam allowance is already in it. I don't need to do anything there. So that's the piece that's going to sit above the sleeve. I'll just put a marker in, put the grain line, and lace. Oops, spelt it wrong. Lace cut 2. So basically that's the last piece. So after cutting the fabric, which is just a light satin, the lining and also the lace, we stitched it together and it turned out really good. It's very similar to the picture and everyone's happy. And so we've tried it on our granddaughter and she looks beautiful in it. So this didn't take long to make. It took roughly just under an hour to cut all the fabric and just over 3 hours to sew it all together. So as I said before, it's pretty basic. So what I've done is basically used a cotton lining on the inside, and so it didn't need to make a facing because the lining became the new facing, and so that finishes off the edge, and it turned out really good. And so the sleeves are only just a single fabric, and so there's no lining in that. So it really was quick and easy to sew. All I did was gather the waist and sew that into the bodice. So the lace itself is just stitched in. So the lace comes in a roll. I bought like about 3 or 4 meters. To make the base, all I did was just sew that to the bottom of the skirt, and it has its own finish, and then I overlocked it. So that finishes off beautifully. That really was easy to do. And just the sleeves. So this little lace section of the sleeve turned out good. In hindsight, I could have made it fan out a bit more to make it more puffy, but it still looks really nice. So I'm happy with that. And the straps turned out really good. The length was perfect for the straps. So really good. Overall, I'm very happy with this garment. So I did end up putting an elastic into the sleeve to make it look gathered, and just made it a lot easier to make, and also looked really good. And that way you can get your fingers through, so you don't make it too small for the fingers. And also on the back here, I did end up cutting into the skirt in the back so we can get this over the baby's head. So I wasn't sure if it's going to be big enough to go over her head, so I put that in just in case. And then I just stitched the buttonholes and put the buttons in, and it was finished. It's quick and easy. And I also put in my label. I really do enjoy making clothes, but I don't get much time to do it these days. But I hope this video inspires you to do the same. And I really hope that manufacturing of clothes comes back to Australia. I think that'd be a great thing. I really do enjoy pattern making. I find it very satisfying to work out all those measurements and it all comes together. It's actually really satisfying. Now, if this has inspired you to do it, but you're not feeling comfortable or confident enough, I will put a link below of someone who does teach it and also teaches how to do dressmaking. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get something out of it. And if you have any comments at all, please leave them below and I will get back to you. And I'd ask you, please consider to subscribe, hit the like button and share this video, and there's many more to come. Thanks guys.